Hi, everyone. Ariana Friedlander here with Rosabella Consulting, and welcome to the Co-Creators in Conversation interview series, where we celebrate leaders who are challenging the status quo and creating economic value by genuinely caring about other people. Right now, I am really excited to be speaking with Michele Heyward, founder of Positive Hire. Welcome, Michele. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I wonder to start if you could tell us a little bit about what you do at Positive Hire.
Positive Hire is an early stage tech startup where we focus on connecting Black, Latinx, and Indigenous women who are experienced scientists, engineers, and technology professionals to management roles. We're
Hmm.
really focused on retaining the talent that has 10 plus years of experience before they leave. And
Hmm.
organizations say they can't find them. Well, I can. And so I'm helping them stay there because that's really where they want to be.
Wow. Hearing you describe what you do there just gave me goosebumps. That sounds like such a powerful uh, service that you are offering to the tech world. It sounds like mostly is where you work then.
We do technology. We also do a lot of engineering.
Hmm.
My background civil engineering, so
Yeah,
engineering is where I started, and then tech mixes in because you have some engineers that are on the tech side as well.
right. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how Positive Hire came to be. I recall from earlier conversations you shared uncovering that a lot of minorities in engineering felt left behind in their careers. So tell us a little bit about like those experiences uncovering that shared struggle.
So I worked in heavy construction out on the construction site for 12 years. And in that time, I thought I was way behind my counterparts that I worked with previously, that were in the company, that were friends that I made in college.
Hmm.
And what I came to find out was I was actually doing better than them, although I wasn't where I wanted to be in my career.
Hmm.
In having those discussions, what I found out was all of these barriers they had encountered that I had initially encountered in my career, but were able to circumvent them or have them removed because I ended up getting a sponsor. And so, literally
Interesting.
having so many of us leave, it's so small, it's so few of us. Like when you think about engineers,
Hmm.
if you put together all the Black women, all the Latinas, all the Native women with engineering degrees, you have less than 4%.
Wow.
And so if a third of them are leaving, right, you have even a smaller number of engineers that are remaining. So
Right.
focusing on such a small number to most people, like that doesn't really make sense for me. I'm talking about myself, so it makes complete sense, and that's really
Right.
why I started doing building out Positive Hire.
Yeah. Well, and especially makes sense that if you're feeling left behind and left out and not, that there aren't people supporting you, then focusing on that small group of people in need of support is, even if it's a small group, makes so much more sense to me than going for the masses that are already getting so much support.
Exactly.
Um, I wonder, you mentioned that you heard of a lot of barriers that women of color were experiencing to advancement. Can you describe what some of those are for listeners?
Oftentimes when they would walk into me, well, one of these things was if you were given an assignment, right? Let's say they say, "Oh, you're going to run this project." I've literally had many women tell me people in their organizations would have meetings about their projects and never tell them, just come back and give assignments. And one woman I know, one of her coworkers, like, "Are you coming to the meeting? We're talking about the project." Her boss had formed a meeting, invited all the other project managers and engineers, but did not invite her, but told her she was running it. And it is a recurring problem. The other thing is often not giving them technical work. Even if they're technically good at what they do, they
Yeah.
give them more of the housekeeping things. Oh, we'll take the notes, organize the meeting. And they're really looking to do more electrical engineering design work, mechanical systems, and they're getting regulated to other tasks that really don't really focus on their technical expertise. And so we see that over and over again where they're giving these what I call housekeeping duties as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to real core technical work that which is why they got into science and engineering and tech in the first place.
Wow, both of those examples sound incredibly humiliating, to have to experience not being invited to the table. I mean, that it's so much harder to succeed when you're not able to be a part of those meetings where critical information is discussed and shared. That is just so frustrating to hear that that's happening.
And then your boss is just coming back to you and telling you what you're going to do because everybody else except for you have have buy-in on a project you're supposed to be running, and that's in air quotes. The
Right.
other thing is if things go wrong, you're to blame for it, but you had no input in it. And of course, if everything goes right, it was none of your ideas. You're
Ugh,
executing on other people's. And
yeah.
so not even if they get invited to the meeting, oftentimes people think they're an admin. And there's nothing wrong with admin support, but it's always
No.
assumed they're an admin and not an engineer. And I personally have had that experience wherein somebody's walked in the work trailer and I happen to be walking towards the front door and comes and say, "Hey, I'm looking for the admin Michelle." And I goes, "There isn't an admin Michelle, there's an engineer Michelle." Guy never apologizes ever
Wow.
because he had to pick up drawings for me. So his assumption was, well, if it's a woman name, maybe if I had been a man named Michelle, which does exist, right?
Right. Yeah. It is one of those names that you can be a man or a woman with for sure.
But never ever apologize.
Yeah.
And so that was very very common for me, even when I was out in corporate and in the space, and it hasn't changed. Even being a tech founder, that I
Wow.
still get the same assumptions that I don't know what I'm talking about. But I
Right.
always go, when you have electricity in your house, don't think of your utility company. Think of me because I built the grid, and it's a completely different look on the face. Like, oh, like you got to sit at home. I was out there making sure it's done. So it's some things we get to do at the end of the day and
Right.
say,
Yeah. And such important work and such a value to society when we can enjoy the fruits of, your studies and efforts. It benefits all of us.
exactly, it really does.
I wonder, you uncovered some of these barriers. You mentioned that for you, those barriers were removed because you had a sponsor. Tell us how that relationship looked and how your sponsor removed those barriers.
I can, I was, this was during the Great Recession.
Okay.
And so I started a project right in the midst of the housing boom, gotten into construction. I worked on capital projects, so like $350 million to over $1 billion budgets for the projects I worked on. And the Great Recession came while I was in construction.
Ooh.
My parents have 5 children.
Mm.
80% of their children were laid off, meaning
Wow.
only one of us had a job, and that was me, and I worked in construction.
Wow.
So I worked in a global organization. At the time, I think we were probably about 50,000 employees before they started laying off. What happened with me having a sponsor was if I needed certain types of training, it wasn't a question about it happening. If
Mm.
I needed to lead a project a certain way, I usually not all the time could get the resources that I need to have allocated.
Mhm.
People didn't question me
Mm.
as often internally because once I had the sponsor. Externally, contractors and on the job site's different.
Mhm.
But what really happened for me were I stayed employed. I went from this one project that I started
Wow.
in 2010, finished up in 2014 to another project. It wasn't a question like, hey, you're going to this project. It wasn't like, oh my God, I'm about to be laid off. I had a place to go. And so it's really important to understand that sponsors remove barriers and
Mhm.
they provide opportunity. Mentors are great, they have a place, but
Yeah.
to me, sponsors are greater. And when you have a sponsor, you really have somebody that sees the potential and what you bring, the value you bring to an organization, and they're in behind closed doors and they're saying things about you to help you grow as a leader, but also to get you more opportunity in the organization.
Yeah. And is there a way you formalize that relationship? I assume it's with somebody that has seniority.
Yes. So this person was a vice president at the time, was very senior, probably about 45 years of experience
Wow.
in engineering and construction, and was definitely senior, newer to the organization, meaning less than 10 years. There are a lot of people that spent their entire career at this org, but he was newer, less than 10 years, but was very much a leader. And if you ever want to study the difference between a manager and a
Mm,
leader, people like in our leadership team, I always change it to your management team
right.
because
Yeah.
I don't follow anybody and everybody. They're management, right? And
Mm,
so he very much had a leadership ability. And what I mean by this very specifically, he would get on team calls, and we were spread across the U.S. about 50 people internally on this project, and he would go, the client really likes the work you're doing. They're really excited. They like the progress we're making. They see how we are moving past and some of the barriers that we identified and other ones that have come about.
mhm.
That will be one call. The next week or sometimes the next day, the client isn't happy about X, Y, and Z. I didn't do something wrong. I need to be able to help the client because I'm they're not able to see X, Y, and Z. I will be
Mhm.
calling upon some of you to help me correct the error I made.
Mm,
Whenever there was something good to say, he gave it to the team. Whenever there was something bad that was going on, he carried the weight of that and
mm.
asked us to support him. But if you're in some managers, what you see is you did this wrong, the team screwed up.
Right.
Now I'm going to show you how to correct it. And
Hmm.
when you work for that and you verbally hear that over and over again, you know what happens? This person now becomes a leader. You're willing to follow them, right?
Yeah.
And you're willing to help them when they call upon you. And even if they don't, because they are giving you all the wins and they're taking all the losses. And that
Yeah.
is, when you have a sponsor like that, it's a completely different type of dynamic.
Oh, that's so powerful. And I mean, it sounds like a true also culture of learning as well, which I know a lot of organizations aspire to being, but I think miss actually having, being a learning organization because they have a culture of blame, as kind of like
Exactly.
you were describing managers. Oh, you did this wrong, you did that wrong, and then taking the credit when things do go right, which is the predominant way that organizations have been run in our society for a very long time. It's just a
Absolutely.
matter of the awareness.
Exactly. And it's also power dynamics. And
Oh, gotcha.
his engagement wasn't about power.
Mhm.
His engagement was really about how to grow members on his team as much as possible. And he taught through storytelling because it's very powerful. And I remember some of
Mhm.
those stories
Nice.
about an engineer who made decisions, and decisions always ended up getting the project in a worse predicament than before.
Right.
But the engineer would never ask for help, and it just
Mm.
came to the point where he had to step in. His point was this: he's like, you all, when something goes wrong, you have to make a decision to try to fix it. However, that decision sometimes can be asking for help, and there's no shame in asking for help. It is better to do it
Indeed.
sooner than later.
Yeah.
And that was really what he really pushes. No shame in asking for help. And oftentimes in the workplace, if you're asking for help, obviously you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
You shouldn't have your job. You're not worthy of being here. His viewpoint was, if you ask for help, this is exactly where you should be. You
Mm.
know you need help, and in order to for us to serve the client better, we have to be able to help you get X, Y, and Z done. And so it's a
Yeah.
completely different mind shift, like you said, of what you
Mhm.
all often see in a blame culture in
Right.
many organizations.
And what I hear you describing is the difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset, right? Where in a
Exactly.
fixed mindset, it's, oh, we can't ask for help because we already are supposed to have all the answers. Whereas in a growth mindset, we recognize and celebrate the fact that we are aware of what we don't know
Exactly.
and lean into that.
Exactly. And you want your people to grow. If they
Yeah.
aren't growing, it might be time for them to retire or find something else to do, or they're
Yeah.
already doing something else. And it's like, yeah, I've not gone as far as I want to go.
Well, and I've worked with clients too, where they have an employee that is stuck in that fixed mindset, and the domino effect of problems that can occur because their employee doesn't want to grow with changes that are occurring. And this is, really obvious in technology when there's, adaptations of new technology or adoption of new technology, like in accounting. You don't have to be in technology for technology to be impacting how your job is being done. And if you're resisting that change, it can have a really negative domino effect within the organization.
Welcome to the world of construction. What do you
Yeah.
mean? Yes. So, I've seen that stuck mindset on the very same project. We hired some retirees to come in to manage some of the construction activities, and they were like, "Well, who's going to put in our time?" We were like, "You are." They're like, "We don't have a clerk. Like, do you want to get paid?"
Right.
But I will tell you this much: those older men were smart enough. They did not come to the only black woman on the team. They went to one of the younger white guys on the team and had him start putting in their time. So they were savvier than some other people. It was like, we're not gonna bother her. We're gonna bother him. So it was,
Nice.
and I didn't know this for like a year. I was like, so they learned how to put. He's like, no, I put in their time.
Oh, interesting. That is so interesting. It's great hearing about the experience you had with your sponsor. It sounds like that this leader not only impacted your path professionally and really helped to give you a path where before there were barriers, but also really influenced you as a professional and as a leader yourself by modeling certain behaviors and exhibiting a method of leadership that really resonated with you.
Absolutely. And I was struggling when I joined that particular project. I was struggling in the initial role I had. But he saw something in me and had heard great things about me in what we call the home office. I was in the field, and then you have the home office. And he said, "I want you to take over this role. Apply for this role on the project." I applied for it and I killed the role. Like the other one, like he was like, "I don't," and we had that conversation a year or two later. I was pulled over on the side of the road in my construction truck, and he was in some nice office, I'm sure, at home. But he was like, you really struggled on this project at the beginning, but you did so well. I knew you could do it. You just needed X, Y, and Z. And we had it was a short but very meaningful conversation that day. And it's when you have a sponsor, even if you're in a bad place in your career, they see something in you.
Yeah.
The oftentimes what happens when it comes to Black, Latinx, and Indigenous women, culturally, we may not respond. And so our white counterparts then aren't sure, well, do they not care? Do they care? But not understand the cultural differences of what
Mm.
that looks like. And trying to build a personal bond can be very different because oftentimes for us, sharing personal information at work can hurt us in the long term than it may often benefit us. And
Mm.
so that's why it can be very difficult for dominant cultures to really understand marginalized people, and our responses or what they think is our lack of response is always very protective of our spaces as opposed
Mhm.
to being open to others can be our way to self-preserve. And
Right.
those are just things culturally through all the aggressions and the isms that we encounter. And others who don't come to harm us don't really know how to engage to
Mm.
and build that rapport. So
Wow, that is such a really insightful and generous share that you just gave to us, and especially for those listeners that are within the dominant culture, to be able to step back and self-analyze and evaluate. Am I expecting a reaction from my minority employees that fits what I think they should do, and not recognizing and standing in their position to understand, that need for self-preservation that might not be part of, my story and my journey.
exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so when you say not responding the way others might expect, it sounds like what you're describing is a reserved approach instead of a more kind of verbal and open share of a
Exactly. The
response.
share, yeah, the share might not be open. And I remember having this, um, we do a lot of virtual events, and it was an executive, and she was sharing how she had told her boss about something personal in her
Mm,
life. And one of her coworkers came to her and was like, her boss was so surprised that you shared X, Y, and Z. And she was like, what do you mean? It's like, well, you don't have any pictures. You never talk about what do you do outside of work. She's like, I come to work, I do my job, and I leave.
right.
And what happens is, especially women, is, well, you have kids,
Mhm.
or you just got married, so you're about to have kids, or if you're a caretaker to your parents. So people then make all of these assumptions as to how you should rise, how much,
Mhm.
how many hours you're going to put in, your availability to work late. And so people don't share these things, or where you live, right? Oh, that's such a far commute. You won't be able to work on this project or travel. And they
Mhm.
put their limiting beliefs on you, and
Right.
so people often don't share these things. And I remember, even though I had a sponsor, they wanted to know, they were talking about how all of them ended up in construction. And they looked at me like, I guess you just kind of found your way here. I never told them I was third generation construction. My grandfather had his own construction company.
Wow.
But then the question is going to come, oh, well, why don't you run it? And like, that's not for me to discern, to share with you unless I want to.
Mm,
And so, or assuming we're the first generation college graduate,
right.
we're not always the first. I'm third again. And so
Yeah.
there are all of these assumptions that people make, and you have to build that rapport with the person.
Mm,
And so it's really important to try different things, but be consistent. But more importantly, ask them how they like to be approached. Ask them when, and let them know, whenever you want to share, feel free,
right.
right? And it
Mm.
could be little things like, I'm allergic to peanuts, number one.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So helpful to know too, because,
yeah,
if
exactly,
food is such a great way to bond and
exactly.
never want to harm someone with that, but also creating that invitation, as you said, instead of the expectation.
Exactly. And I think oftentimes it's the expectation. And I remember having a conversation about interviewing candidates, and like, well, how do we, I want to get to know them during the interview process. Like, you haven't even created a safe space.
Hmm.
I like, interview me for my abilities.
Right.
Then if I'm hired, then you can work on creating a personal bonding connection with me. But
Mm.
by trying to connect connecting with people, rather doing an interview process, is really then going to even lower your ability to diversify your talent within your organization. And so you really want to be very succinct, very systematic. I know I'm an engineer, but also equitable in how you're doing your interviewing process. And so I keep that in mind, because again, you're trying to build something from your expectations,
Right.
not understanding the other party culturally. And that's
Hmm.
really what we try to explain to people, because we do, while we have the technology as part of our solution, it's a human problem that has to be solved by humans. And so there's a lot of training that goes on how to ask questions, how to respond, how to build safe spaces where people of marginalized communities are able and willing to have conversations on an individual and a personal level.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what you're sharing is, I know for myself, my mind is just like racing with processing and thinking through things in a new fashion, especially, with the work I do. Connection is something that I'm always striving for, with clients, and when creating containers for facilitating retreats and things like that. And that's a little different, I think, maybe than the hiring process, where we're looking for skills, but just recognizing, we always have to be aware and mindful that connecting is what that means, and what that looks like is very personal. Um,
Exactly. It's
there's
different
not
from
one way to
networking.
connect. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's different from networking, right?
Right.
Connecting is finding that very a common bond between a
Hmm.
person and yourself. And people always think, oh, it's something that has to be really grand. And I go back, I still remember this to this day. I had a Ford Escort when I was in college. And I remember being in a mall parking lot. This is probably early 2000s. And the lady's like, oh my God, I had the same color green Ford Escort when and we had this conversation about Fords and our first cars and it being this color green.
Right.
And and it's something that small. It's like, oh, how's the Ford doing? And and it really, and I still remember this like 20 years later.
Yeah.
It is something very, very small, but yet meaningful to both parties that you can really connect on.
Right. And I think that what you're describing calls attention to some of the work Brene Brown's done around vulnerability, and vulnerability isn't disclosure. And I think same thing with like connecting on a personal level isn't necessarily disclosure. It's
No,
it's finding that shared experience.
exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
that can be about a Ford excursion, and not about some kind of monumental personal trauma. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, you shared earlier that you had identified and uncovered these barriers, and particularly, even though you felt like you were behind in your own career, realized, wow, there's other people that have not had this sponsor remove their barriers, other minorities. What was it like bringing that knowledge to the attention of leadership?
I didn't actually bring it to the attention of leadership. The
Okay.
leadership in that organization was not open to it. I highly doubt. I still know people that work there in different divisions. It's
Mhm.
still very performative.
Okay.
They maybe in the future, maybe different leadership, it'll change. The previous leadership, the reason I say that, the previous CEO is no longer there.
Okay.
So maybe with the new CEO, it may change. But what I mean by performative, not just in, of course, in practice, but
Hmm.
when you see that diversity, equity, inclusion teams turn over, employees leave within 12 to 24 months on a consistent basis,
Hmm.
you know that your experience is definitely going in when you have that like literally like clockwork,
Mm.
Hispanic men, Black women, they're all leaving within nobody's staying past 24 months.
Mm.
And so it's really, really interesting, not interesting, sad to see
Yeah.
because it's an indication that leadership does not buy in and is not supporting what is going on in the organization when it comes to marginalized employees. And that's
Right.
on many levels. That's even differently abled, sexual orientation. And so you really have to pay attention, especially in large orgs. What is the shuffle like, as I say, who's moving in and out of the organization and what roles, even outside of the great, what they're terming the great resignation, which I'm saying is, oh, Black people, we've set the culture trend. We've been quitting for years and saying it's bad cultures. Now everybody else is caught up. Now it's a thing, but we'd already
Right.
set that trend.
Mm.
So welcome to 25 years of data. We've been doing this that
Wow.
the rest of the corporate America has shown up.
Right. And so what I hear you describing there is the performative nature of DEI efforts are just the check marks, right? Oh, we did this,
Yeah.
we did that. We're checking it off without that deeper introspective journey as an organization and as individuals to really question, how are we showing up? What is our culture? How is it favoring dominant cultures and suppressing minorities? And what can we do to shift that dynamics? It,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. I would say organizations that are doing this well, number one, their C-suite, their management team, upper management team, senior management teams are working on their individual awareness of what racism is.
Yeah.
They're not hiring somebody in diversity, equity, inclusion, or in those spaces. They're literally like, I need to know what is racism, what is anti-racism, and and if I, and how am I playing a part into this? Because I don't get it, right?
Right. Yeah.
And that self-awareness is the first thing because you can't possibly change an organization if
Yeah.
you don't know yourself what you are doing that's racist. And those to me are the biggest part. Then the second part of that is the accountability part. Because when organizations don't hit their DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion goals, let me start saying using acronyms, their chief diversity officer is the person that ends up getting removed.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the power dynamics, first of all, chief diversity officers are not considered C-suite people. Those
Mm-hmm.
roles are generally C-suite. They are given too often a very limited budget and a very, very small staff to
Mm-hmm.
change, do culture change within, if usually it's, Black History Month,
Right.
we're going to bring in a speaker, but we don't want to pay anybody.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to change our website
Right.
to do this, and we're going to showcase or highlight Black employees, a few of them, and that's it. It, but who does that really help at the end of the day? Who learns from Black History Month? And before you do these things, you need to address that, and organizations aren't doing that. And so that the self-awareness, the accountability, and not continue doing more performative stuff. So for this year, at least LinkedIn didn't change its logo. It needs to work on its policies of what it and its community guidelines. But yeah, so that's
Right.
I mean, some performative thing like don't change your logo, go do
Yeah.
some work internal to the org.
For sure. And it's interesting because what you're describing as the reason, DEI efforts fail is because those efforts are, circumscribed by the same barriers that keep minorities from progressing into higher level positions in their careers. It's just, we're going to call it this thing that is, to do good, but we're not going to actually change the interaction dynamics and the underlying prejudices or assumptions
Exactly.
that will just sustain that problem. It might take a different flavor.
Exactly.
Slightly. Yeah.
I've seen some changes in the way organizations are going about actually doing some work. So there's a great article in Slate where Slate talks about even back in the 70s how tech trained Black and Hispanic people to get jobs in technology. The diversity should not be an issue in tech because you've been doing this for 40 years, but you've been trying to fix people and not the culture itself. And
Right.
so now what we're seeing is organizations like, you know what, we're going to send Black people into the training programs that are already employees to prepare them for management roles.
Mm-hmm.
We're also going to send managers through cultural training
Right.
so they know how to support their Black employees to get promoted. And it's always been one way. It's something wrong if you're not a white employee, and so you need the training. What they're saying now is,
Right.
okay, we haven't given you the appropriate training to lead and manage in this organization. We're going to give you that because we understand we didn't do this, but we also understand in order for you to get the support and the sponsorship and too often over mentored and get you the sponsorship you really need in the organization and hopefully partnership as well, we're going to now train managers.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so literally look and see the dynamics that are going on in organizations, and that'll give you a better idea on the levels of performativeness that may be occurring.
Yeah. And it's so fascinating to hear you describe how similar what that process looks like to that personal journey that leaders in the C-suite need to take of really stripping down biases and just different assumptions that have been internalized over time and operated on out of habit. It's a very, it's a very uncomfortable journey, and it's essential if you want to live in alignment with your values. If it really matters to you to be the type of leader that genuinely cares about other people, you can't do that and not confront your own biases, assumptions, and other issues that are affecting how equitable you are being as a leader.
Absolutely. I remember seeing a tweet recently, and it's something about how you said going through that process. The tweet was, "What happened to the racial reckoning?" And somebody said they came, they reckoned, they felt uncomfortable, they left. The uncomfortableness is where you're going to find the growth and the change. You have to take action in there as well. And so when we see white people who said they want to be allies or they are allies get uncomfortable and leave, imagine what that comfort is to live that way for 70, 80
Oh,
years,
yeah.
right? Like, I couldn't do it. Like, welcome to my, I don't have a choice. And
Mm-hmm.
so really think about that before you give up and never come back. Maybe you're like, okay, let me step away and let me come back. But literally think about it in that framework of this is how people have to live. They don't have that option to leave out of that comfort space. So, and I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And what you described is just the epitome of privilege.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you sharing that. And you've shared so generously of your story and of your experiences. And I'm so grateful for that. And on behalf of our listeners, just want to express my gratitude to you for sharing so generously. As we wrap up, I wonder if you can just real quick tell us, what does co-creating look like for you in your business at Positive Hire now?
So co-creating for us is really three parts. And the three parts is Positive Hire being in the middle. And on one side, we have our Black, Latinx, and Indigenous women in STEM, and they're sharing their struggles, their goals, and their wins. And us taking that information and going to employers like, hey, this is what they've achieved. Oh, we didn't know that.
Mm.
These are their goals. Oh, that's really great, but these are their struggles, right? And
Mm-hmm.
co-creating is creating solutions, right? Those
Mm-hmm.
struggles that are so prevalent, yet they're very consistent in the career paths and journeys of these women.
Yeah.
How do we remove those barriers? What solutions do we have to deploy to make sure they are gone, but also they don't return? And
Mm.
that's really, really important. That, to me, that is what co-creating means here at Positive Hire.
Wow, that is such a purposeful expression of co-creating, and hearing about, how hard it is for minorities to share personal things with employers. It's amazing that you can create that, really be that conduit, and create that space to say, okay, you can share in here. You can share your truth, share your struggles, share your successes, and it's going to be a safe place to share. And then we're going to provide that data. Um,
Exactly.
so that's amazing. I love hearing that. If any of our listeners want to get in touch with you or Positive Hire, what's the best way for them to do that?
So you can always shoot me an email at Michele.Heyward at Positive Hire, and that's HIRE, like hire people.com. And it's called Positive Hire for a reason. The women we work with, the woman that I am, we are often looked at negatively. So I named the company Positive Hire. We are the Positive Hire. And if you go to positivehire.co, you can, if you want to schedule a call because your organization is in the midst of a culture shift, right? And you want to talk about diversity and inclusion training, you want to talk about diversity recruitment or people analytics, definitely just go schedule a call with us, and we definitely get on the line to see if there's a good fit, if we're able to help you move through the next stage of your shift in your organization.
Fantastic. And if any of our listeners want to get in touch with you, we will include those links in the show notes. And also, I just always want to encourage our listeners too, if there's just one thing that you heard from this interview that really has sparked some curiosity within you, follow that, act on it, try something different. You don't have to do it all at once. Just start with one simple, small thing. And if it helps, share it with a friend, because that makes us more likely to follow through on those little tugs of curiosity that we can explore and become the leader we strive to be. Thank you so much, Michele, for sharing your story. It's been
Thank you.
great.
Thank you
Yeah.
for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to our listeners. If you want to get more co-creators in conversation interviews, you can check them out at rosabellaconsulting.com. Thanks, everyone, and take care.